and welcome back to another episode of Commentator's Corner. This is episode number 7. I'm Tyler Reedy along with Brendan Preisman, and the stakes are getting higher this week as we've got playoff football to talk about with Creighton Prep. So how you doing, Brendan?
Doing pretty well. Obviously, we missed last week because pretty busy, PSAT stuff and whatnot.
Yeah, sure.
Some hard classes, but schedule's lightening up as we head into November, which is good. Prep schedule finally getting tougher. Opponent that they'll be playing since North Platte, so definitely looking interesting. And we get the night game this Friday. Doesn't kick off till 8 p.m., so hope nobody has any long homework assignments over the weekend because we're going to be out there for a long while.
Yeah, so Friday night we got the second round or first round, whatever you want to call it, of the playoffs. 24 teams were included this year in the Class A bracket. You had, I guess, the wild card round last week with the 9 through 24 seeds, and that sets up a 16-team playoff the rest of the way. So number 6 Creighton Prep taking on number 11 Millard North on Friday night. It's at 8 p.m. because Prep obviously shares the field with Westside. Westside has their home playoff game scheduled for 4 p.m., so they got to play theirs, move everybody out of the stadium, move everybody for Prep in, and play the Junior Jays Mustangs game at 8 p.m. So should be a good one. Millard North is riding a hot streak, as is Creighton Prep coming in.
Yeah, both these teams having very similar season arcs. Millard North started off playing 4 top 7 teams, at least based on the current playoff bracket. 4 top 7 teams in the first 5 weeks. Somehow managed to get a win out of that, 46-41 barn burner against Lincoln East. But then since then, they got a close double overtime win over Grand Island, 38-35. They crushed Fremont, and then in the wild card round last 52-6. So they're riding the hot streak. Prep obviously riding the hot streak too. Haven't even been threatened since that Millard West game, 24-7, 67-0, and 28-6. So it's 2 teams riding hot streaks, and it's kind of an unstoppable force versus an immovable object kind of game.
Yeah, so let's talk about this Creighton Prep season because you and I have been here for 3 football seasons now, and this one was very different than anything we've seen before. Our freshman and sophomore year, 2018-2019, both followed a very similar trajectory. Hot starts, people getting excited, and then you run into the West Side game. Prep gets blown out, and then they limp into the playoffs, lose first round. But now you get the West Side game out of the way in week 1, and then a couple more close losses, and then boom, big comeback against Millard West, 4 straight wins, and here they go into the playoffs looking good as ever.
Yeah, and one thing that I think might have been beneficial to the team, although it's really not beneficial for anyone, but the coronavirus outbreak forced the cancellation of the Bellevue West game. Use any of the games that they actually played this year. They're the 1 seed, they're the defending champ. So Prep missing out on that game, which was supposed to have taken place on September 11th, might be actually beneficial to their season because I mentioned this in a couple of previous episodes now. I've talked with Coach Fife, the offensive coordinator for Prep, and he mentioned that the week off actually amp and retool the offense and defense, especially after the West Side game. And, well, it's become pretty clear that what they did worked quite well.
Yeah, boy, was the offense ever retooled. The Prep run game, which was non-existent through the first half of the season, just absolutely took off with that Millard West comeback. Running back Jack Stessman finished with 101 carries, 595 rushing yards, and 4 touchdowns on the season. He had a 200-yard game at North Platte first week of October, and then Alex Bullock in the pass game was phenomenal. He had, I believe, over 500, maybe 600 receiving yards. Officially, it was, 550 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, and then 5 interceptions on the other side as well. So Prep really got hot, especially on offense, and as they got that run game going, they seemed to get a lot more confident on the offensive side of the ball in October.
Yeah, and the defense still stepping up. The 4-game win streak, if you only include the fourth quarter of the Millard West game, they've allowed 19 total points. 13 total points in those 3 games in the fourth quarter of the Millard West game. They shut out Millard West in the fourth quarter after, in the first three quarters, Millard West looked really, really good. They beat North Platte 24-7, and that game was really more of a blowout. Prep just had their way with North Platte, especially Stessman. Lincoln Northeast 67-0 blowout. We called that game. So many rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
And then Papillion Vista South 28-6. So the offense and the defense are really good at the same time, which, as you mentioned, we've been here for 3 years. We haven't really seen that yet. Occasionally we've seen losing a shootout or the defense playing well, but then the offense not showing up. Now we've got both, and that makes Prep a scary team for anyone in the playoffs.
Yeah, so the offense figuring out, the defense has gotten the job done as well in the second half of the season. I remember last year and the first couple weeks of this year, Prep could not stop the run. They were powerless in terms of run defense, but down the stretch, they've really been stout in that front seven. And then in the secondary as well, when opposing teams have decided to throw the ball, they've gotten the job done as well. So in Class A football, you're not going to see a lot of teams that throw the ball a lot. Most teams are just going to try and run it repeatedly. And Creighton Prep's been up to the challenge with the defense, and they're going to have a big test again in the playoffs with Millard North.
Yeah, last year, probably one of the highlights of the Prep season, another huge comeback. Prep just managing to gut out a 31-30 win after being down, I believe, 20 at the start of the fourth quarter. But they're going to have another test again. Millard North bringing back their quarterback, senior Jimmy Quaintance. 14 yards, 7 touchdowns on the season. But where he does his real damage is in the running game. 192 carries, 1,064 yards, and 14 touchdowns. All of those team highs. And Millard North is one of those teams that, of course, runs the option quite a bit. And Quaintance is one of the best guys you'll see at running that system.
Yeah, and Quaintance, you mentioned what he can do on the ground. He's a capable thrower as well. 414 passing yards, and with most of those quarterbacks that are run-first guys, you're going to see them throw more interceptions than touchdowns because throwing the football is just generally not what they're comfortable with. But Quaintance had 7 passing touchdowns compared to 4 interceptions on the season, over 50 passing yards per game. So he can get the job done both ways, and he did it on Friday night in the wild card game against Norfolk. Had an 80-yard touchdown run, but also 2 long touchdown passes as well. So he's a dual-threat guy, but it's going to be a tough challenge to try and stop him on the ground for sure.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of Jacob Jones, the Millard West quarterback, who Prep kind of fortunately near the end of the third quarter of that Millard West game, and that played, you and I both believe, some part in helping the Prep comeback along, but Quaintance isn't the only guy that Prep has to worry about stopping on this Millard North offense. There's also another senior, the running back, Jason Cox. He has 120 carries this year, and he's taken those for 586 yards. Probably the number one guy that Quaintance looks to if he can't keep the ball. So those two, kind of a two-headed monster in the backfield. But, of course, with the triple option offense, there's a lot of other guys you could look to as well.
Yep, and as a team, they have been dominant over the past 4 or 5 games running the football. You mentioned the shootout victory over Lincoln East about halfway through the season, the 46-41 win. Millard North rushed for 525 yards as a team and 5 total touchdowns. I mean, those are unbelievable numbers. 78 carries in that game. That's miles ahead of any other game with the carry count this year. And then their last 3 games, Grand Island, Fremont, and the Norfolk game in the playoffs, all 3 of those over 300 yards rushing, all 3 of those at least 4 rushing touchdowns. So this team is so good at executing the triple option, and it's going to be tough to defend.
And they've got a pretty good defense, too. Among the leaders is a sophomore who stepped up for them. One of their middle linebackers, Brian Petrie, 28 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 7.5 tackles for loss. And they've also got a lot of sophomore Noah Boganowski and senior Blake Klossman. Both those guys have over 100 offensive yards and 2 touchdowns, but they both also have multiple interceptions. So this team, much like on offense, they're all over the field on defense too.
Yeah, you mentioned Blake Klossman, leading tackler, also has 8 tackles for loss on the season. He's up there in the sack count as well, leads the team in interceptions with I believe it's 3 of them. Yep, 3 interceptions for Klossman. So Millard North's got some playmakers on defense as well. They've struggled at times defensively in some of those shootout games with Lincoln East and, of course, against the higher-end teams like Westside and Millard South. But they've had some good games as well where they've limited the opposition's scoring like they did last week with Norfolk. So the battle I'm most excited for is that Millard North rushing attack against the red-hot Prep run defense, because that battle in the trenches is going to be something else.
For sure. And we've seen it go both ways with Prep this season when they've been facing powerful rushing attacks like Millard West and North Platte. Against Millard West, first 3 quarters, wrong. I remember you mentioned that a couple weeks ago that Prep went a couple of weeks with no completions allowed.
Yeah.
But for those first 3 quarters, it wasn't because the secondary was playing out of their minds. It was because Millard West didn't need to throw the ball because Jacob Jones was just running rampant. But then last quarter against Millard West, and we saw Prep just shut down the opposition's running attack, and we might see another feast or famine performance against Millard North here.
Yeah, they're going to have to definitely work hard to stop Jimmy Quaintance, as we mentioned earlier, in both facets, run and pass. But Creighton Prep has proven over the last several weeks that they can do that. So what do you think are the biggest keys to the game for both of these teams? Obviously stopping the run, getting off to hot starts maybe. But what are the biggest keys to the game for both these two teams? Because the stakes are extremely high, obviously, with the playoffs.
Well, one of the keys to the game for Prep, I'd say, is just don't let the atmosphere get into the playoff game favored for the first time in, I believe, a couple of years. And what you don't want to see is where the offense gets jumpy and you start having false starts that push you back. I mean, we saw, even against Lincoln Northeast in the blowout, we saw a couple of times on the first drive where big plays got taken back. You and I mentioned that one of the kick returners was holding penalties on plays that turned out to be touchdowns. So Prep is going to have to play a clean game. And then for Millard North, the key is, as you said, not only stopping the run, but just trying to keep the score low, because they had a couple shootouts that you mentioned. They also had 2 21-14 losses to Millard West and Elkhorn. But if they can keep the score low like that, then they can rely on Quaintance to help carry them to victory.
Yeah, I like those 2 points you made. Millard North, Jimmy Quaintance specifically, and Quaintance, if you look at his game-by-game stats, he gets better and better when the games get closer, the games get tighter, and the pressure's on. His best game of the season was that Lincoln East game, that shootout. He had 5 rushing touchdowns, over 200 rushing yards. And then the other point he made about penalties, I remember that first half of the season when Creighton Prep was really, really struggling to find themselves and establish some success as a team. They couldn't get off to fast starts offensively because they kept getting penalized and they kept getting into long down and distance situations. They'd have 3rd and 10, 3rd and 15. But as the season has gone on, they've eliminated those penalties. They've eliminated lost yardage plays, and they've been able to move the ball a lot cleaner. So I like what you said there.
And another thing is both teams are going to have their senior leaders set the tone. For Prep on offense, you've got guys like Meisenberg, Alex Bullock, A.J. Rollins, and on defense, Tony Melitti. And then for Millard North, obviously, you've got guys like Quaintance, Jason Cox, Blake Klausman. But the seniors are going to have to set the tone. They're going to have to come out and play with a desperation that you only really see in do-or-die games like the playoffs. And if they play like that, then the rest of the teams will follow.
Yeah. One thing that might be interesting with this game is the weather, because it's going to be much colder than anything we've seen on this coming Friday night, because obviously it's the end of October. Temperatures are going to be in the upper 30s, lower 40s, so maybe that favors Millard North a bit more, because when it gets colder, potentially windier, it might be more difficult to throw the ball for Creighton Prep, so we'll see if that plays a factor at all.
Yeah.
So
be interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be one heck of a game. Could easily get a shootout, could easily get a defensive battle, but all we know is that it's going to be close. Millard North plays extremely tough. They've played close games against some of the mid-range teams. We talked about how this year in Class A, the teams are really divided up into tiers. You got West Side, Bellevue West, Millard South at the top, and then teams like Elkhorn South, Prep, Lincoln, Southeast in the middle tier, but against teams in that middle tier, Millard North has played them extremely tough. Those close games against Lincoln East, Millard West, and then they got blown out a couple times, but they can play close, and you got to figure they're going to do that against Creighton Prep with their high-powered rushing attack. So it's going to be a fun game to call for sure.
Yeah. And both these teams also similar throughout the years in the playoffs. Both teams had dynastic-like runs at times, but they've fallen off since. Prep, 9 times they've won the state title, 7 of those from 1980 to 1989, and 7 runner-ups, but they haven't made the team. They haven't won the title since 2004, which was ironically a win over Millard North, 21-7. And Millard North, 3 runner-ups finishes from 2002 to 2007, and they also have 5 titles, all since 2003, since 2010. And one of the titles that really started their run of dominance was 3 the year before Prep won. They beat Prep 38-7 in the title game. So these teams pretty familiar with each other. Last time Millard North made the second round, 2016, as I mentioned, they lost to Prep. So these teams very familiar with each other, played each other 4 times, most recent game in 2016, and the games haven't really been close. Has 20 to 18.3 in favor of Millard North, but Prep has won the last 2. And in the regular season, it's been even tighter. Prep, obviously, with that 31-30 comeback win last year. Since 2003, Prep holds the 9-5 series edge, but one of those games by Millard North, and not one, but 2 of the games since 2010 have been 1-point victories for Prep. So these teams always come to play each other. There hasn't been a double-digit victory in this series since that playoff game in 2016, and in the regular season since 2018. So these teams are going to come out to play.
Yeah, it's going to be a close game. There's no doubt about it. These 2 teams are going to give it their all going into the playoffs. They're hungry for another title, and they're hungry to get to the second round. So it should be a fun game. Be sure to tune in to Creighton Prep TV on Friday night. We'll have the call for you. And just quickly recapping the other fall sports for Creighton Prep this year. Tennis finished their season a couple weeks ago. Cross country just finished theirs last week, finished 3rd in state. But the big thing with those 2, got through the season without any major coronavirus issues. So we were able to get there. We weren't sure whether we'd be able to make it with, the whole situation with COVID-19, but we did it. And
we did it.
Yep, should be excited to see how football turns out as well, as we've been able to overcome a lot over the last 2 months as a school and as an athletic community.
It's going to be a tight game, that's for sure.
Yep. Should be a lot of fun on Friday night, so be sure to tune in. Creighton Prep against Millard North, number 6 versus number 11 for the right to go to the second round in the playoffs. So for Brendan Preisman, I'm Tyler Reedy saying goodbye for this week, and we will see you later for the next episode of Commentator's Corner, where we'll discuss the NFL. So be sure to check that out.